We did our project on the Progressive Era, and it's on Amendments 16 through 19 and how these amendments addressed the calls for reform during this era.
All right, so things that are happening during this time period are rapid industrialization, and people didn't really think that poverty, violence, greed, or racism and class welfare could get better by providing good education, a safe environment, and efficient workplace. They thought that the government could fix pretty much everything, and that it was their problem to fix, and that they had nothing to do with it. This is also known as social Darwinism, which was a big thing back then. Also, some other things that were going on were child labor laws and sweatshops that were occurring at this time. People were struggling to pay for food and clean water, which also resulted in health hazards. There was also some problems with prohibition, women's suffrage, the convict lease system was going on, and the expansion of the education systems was a big problem. So another thing for like health hazards and stuff like that, a big thing was, I'm sure you all have heard The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. We use that as an example. This talks about child labor conditions and very unsanitary conditions for the meatpacking industry.
So I'm going to be explaining Amendments 16 through 19 now. Amendment 16 talks about how Congress has the power to make and collect the tax laws without consultation. And then Amendment 17 talks about the U.S. Senate and how it has 2 senators from each state, and they were previously elected by the people. And they serve for 6 years, and they have to have all the qualifications to be elected. When there's a spot open in the Senate, the state from which the person is missing shall have an election, and then a temporary one will be put into place while the other person is being elected by the people. And this amendment cannot be interpreted in a way that makes a person get chosen before it's valid. Okay, so the manufacture, sale, or transportation is prohibited 1 year after the ratification of this article, which is Article 18 now. And the Congress in several states have the power to enforce this law. The article will not work unless it is ratified as an amendment. And for the last amendment, which is 19, no one can be denied the right to vote based on sex. Congress has the right to enforce this amendment.
All right, so now I'm going to be explaining how these amendments compare to the society that is currently the Progressive Era. So, starting with Amendment 16, this amendment allowed the federal government to collect income tax for everyone. The Supreme Court tried to challenge the amendment because they thought it was unconstitutional. This amendment caused a major shift in the way the government influenced society. This caused an end to the corruption and push for social and political change. The government was able to expend on the funds program. All right, moving on to Amendment 17. This amendment was ratified in 1913, and it allowed the people to have direct election of senators instead of state legislatures. Once they are elected, they are no longer under the influence of the people who elected them, but by a group known as mob rule. This amendment modified America's constitutional republic. The checks and balances would become less popular and eventually end altogether. All right, Amendment 18. This amendment was ratified in January of 1919 and went into effect in January of 1920. This amendment prohibited the import and export, transport, and manufacture of alcohol. Herbert Hoover called this a noble experiment in hopes of controlling the people's behavior. Prohibition was supported mainly by middle-class people. There were many positive things about this amendment, like hospitalization and alcoholism went down. There was also a decrease in drunken arrests. Amendment 19, the last one, thank goodness. This amendment was ratified in 1919. This amendment has to do with women's rights. In the beginning of the 20th century, women were working more, receiving a better education, and having less children. They wanted rights, so in July of 1848, 240 women met in New York to try and get the right to vote. In 1869, the National Women's Suffrage Association was formed to try and push for an amendment in the Constitution. Obviously, it worked. All right, so that concludes our project. This show was directed and shot by Paige and Hannah, and as you can tell, Susie and I hosted. So thanks for watching, and hope you learned something. Wait, I can be
So our project is on the progressive area and how area. Hi. Hello. Hi. Okay, our project is on the
All right, so some things happening during the progressive era were
And then now we go on to Amendment 18, which is 1 year after the ratification of the article, the manufacture, sale, or transportation is prohibited. That's the end of the sentence there. Wait. Okay, can we start over? I'm going to be talking about how the amendments. Wait. So for the first amendment,
This amendment prohibited the import and export trade. This amendment modified America's. This amendment prohibited the import and export, transport, and manufacture of alcohol.
Okay, so that concludes our presentation, and this we got a Snapchat.